from speaking to lots of SQE students to want to sit in the areas that you're already doing well in, but actually it's about pushing yourself out of the comfort zone. I don't like getting things wrong. So actually it was really helpful to go back over those questions and think, well, why did I get this one wrong? Those are some of the things that really cemented different areas in my head.
Hello everyone, and welcome to the Student Lawyer podcast series. Whether you're at school, sixth form, university, thinking about a career in law, or exploring law careers, you're in the right place. We are the one-stop shop for student lawyers. If you'd like to join the Student Lawyer as a writer, please email hello@thestudentlawyer.com. This episode is sponsored by the University of Law. The University of Law offers a range of undergraduate and postgraduate courses and master's degrees alongside an award-winning pro bono clinic so you can build up your legal experience while studying. And their Experienced Career Service will enable you to put your best foot forward when launching your legal career. The courses are employment focused and based on real legal practice, so you'll be better prepared for the workplace. Part-time and online study options are available so you can work and study at the same time. Click the link in the description box of the podcast to find out more about the courses on offer. Welcome to the Student Lawyer podcast series. My name's Camilla. I'm a trainee solicitor and I'm going to be your host for today. In today's episode, we're joined by Matthew Letts, who is a Restructuring and Insolvency Solicitor at Isadore Goldman. Matthew has been listed as a key lawyer in the Legal 500 Southeast Insolvency and Corporate Recovery category shortly after qualifying as a solicitor in 2023. Matthew achieved top marks in the SQE, achieving an overall 75% pass mark in August 2023. And he's also a mentor to those looking to enter the legal industry through Grow Mentoring. In this episode, we're going to be finding out more about Matthew's career journey and also finding out his top tips for scoring highly in the SQE. So make sure you stick around to the end of the episode to hear all of that. So without further ado, let's welcome Matthew onto the show. Welcome, Matthew. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you very much for that very warm and kind welcome, Camilla. Lovely to be speaking to you and recording this for the listeners.
Lovely.
It will be of interest.
I'm sure it will. So let's get straight into the questions because I've got quite a few for you today. I wondered if you could perhaps maybe start off by giving the listeners a brief overview of your career history to date.
Sure. So I'd say it's broadly described as non-traditional. And when I say that, it's because I studied chemistry at university, following which I wasn't quite sure what I wanted to do and worked in recruitment for about a year, which taught me a lot, but it also taught me that I didn't want to stay in recruitment. I then worked in a regulated financial services environment for a few different companies over sort of 2-3 years, reached a point in that career where I was working within and on escalated complaint, but found that there wasn't really anywhere to go, wasn't progression available. And actually the most interesting things within my day job would get to a point and then they would be passed over to the legal team. I was very fortunate to, around this time, meet a very wonderful lady who is now my wife, who was working as a paralegal at the time. And she quite bluntly said to me, either you can sort of do something about it or you can stop moaning about how all of the really interesting stuff's going to the legal team. And I acted upon that and I applied for a role as a paralegal in a small sort of 3-office regional law firm working on general commercial and general disputes for a couple of years. It was a real trial by fire, learned an awful lot, threw myself in at the deep end, and then applied for a more specialised role at a top 50 firm, Pennington Blanchard Cooper, which is where I then spent the next 4 years, just over 4 years from 2019 through to the start of 2024. And then I have moved, as you mentioned, very recently to Isadore Goldman, which is a boutique firm of specialist insolvency, bankruptcy and restructuring solicitors. And that's the whistle-stop tour to how I've got to where I am today.
Yeah, that's super interesting. And I feel like I can really resonate with your journey because when I left uni, well, I applied for recruitment roles. I didn't get any of them. And then I ended up working in financial services, complaints handling. And I can really, I can resonate with that in terms of the career progression and wanting to do something else, but not quite knowing how. So it's really good that obviously you found the right path and pursued it, and it's got you to where you are today. So that's really interesting to hear. And I think also the listeners can maybe take away from that, there's not always one linear path to get into law. It's okay if you do other things because it does give you those skills that you can then use to maybe get your first paralegal position, get a trainee position, because I'm sure you learned a lot doing recruitment and in financial services. So, Matthew, you mentioned that you studied chemistry at university. So as a non-law graduate, do you think it was difficult to secure your first paralegal role? How did you go about this?
So I was quite fortunate in terms of, and I've spoken to lots of people about getting that first legal role. And, I'm the first person to admit that I had a very easy ride there because I made one application and got one job, which I appreciate that is not a shared experience, but I did have some insights about the firm that I was applying to, as well as the role, which really helped, and actually realised that as against other candidates, I was never going to be competing in terms of legal knowledge and legal background, and so really focused on the transferable skills that I'd acquired in those other roles and where that could add value to the role and to the team, and emphasize the fact that I was making this move because I was keen to learn, because it's an area that was of great interest to me, and that actually, I'm sure you found this in your day-to-day role, lots of what being a good lawyer is about is actually nothing to do with the law. It's to do with commerciality. It's to do with interpersonal skills. It's to do with being able to be concise in your use of language. It's all of these things that actually have nothing to do with black letter law, but that you can pick up in lots of other ways, whether that be in other careers through volunteering or extracurricular activities.
Yeah, I think that's again an important kind of lesson to, I've been maybe guilty in the past of trying to, try to maybe sound like everybody else in terms of, I've done this legal experience, that legal experience, but actually if you highlight your real strengths, such as the ones that you've developed from your previous jobs, then actually that can make you stand out in a much better way, because like you said, it's not just the law that you're doing every day as a paralegal or as a trainee, it's all those other things like communication skills and commerciality, like you just said. So yeah, I think that's really, really interesting to hear. So then when you started as a paralegal, I assume maybe you were then looking to qualify at that point, or I don't know what your sort of intentions were at that point, but what was your journey to qualification like after you started your first paralegal role? And were there any challenges that you had to overcome? And if so, how did you overcome them?
So I think my first objective was broadly to sort of survive the first 6 months in law, and that was following some very wise advice from my wife, which is that if you get this job, I really think you're not going to enjoy the first 6 months. You're going to be very out of your depth, and actually you're going to wonder what on earth you've done. That turned out to be incredibly good advice. I very much lived that 6 months, found myself thrown into new things, and got through it, and actually then started to find things that I was familiar with, and repeat themes, and that I wasn't perhaps such an imposter, albeit I'll come back to that later within the role. And it was only at that point that really someone within the firm asked me whether I'd thought about qualification, and the honest answer was no, I hadn't. To be completely frank, I hadn't thought I didn't think I'd get the role, so I hadn't thought that far ahead. And it was at that stage that I started talking about what the options were. So I hadn't done a law degree and hadn't done the GDL. And so I actually started pursuing the Silex route around sort of 2018 and completed the first sort of round of Silex exams. So that's Silex level 3, which I'm of the understanding that that's roughly equivalent to sort of A-level standard of law. And that took me through to sort of the back end of 2019, the start of middle of 2020. And it was around that time that this new shiny thing came online called the SQE. And I think even now, many lawyers, when you say qualified lawyers, if you say SQE to them, they have a slightly blank look in their eye, or maybe they've heard of it but have got no real idea of how it works. But it was of quite significant interest to me because I spotted that it didn't require a qualifying law degree. It just required a qualification at MVQ level 6, which my degree ticked that box. My options, I sort of came to this qualification fork in the road where I could pursue Silex, take the level 6 exams, do a year of post-exam experience, complete a portfolio and become a Silex lawyer, or I could pursue the SQE route. And if I passed those exams and had 2 years qualifying work experience signed off, become a solicitor. And I had conversations with colleagues, line manager at the firm, as well as HR around that. And they said, well, look, we don't really have a pathway, or at least we've not got a sort of well-developed pathway at the moment because this is really new. I don't think many firms are intending to have a sort of cemented pathway because of the way the trainee recruitment cycle works. And so if you want to go for this, we'll entertain the idea, but if you put a business plan together and you can put that to us and compare it as against Silex, we'll think about it. So I went away and did that, had some very sort of supportive people in my corner in doing that, and persuaded the firm to allow me to be something of a guinea pig for the SQE. So that was broadly the route that I took. I think the challenges along the way to qualification were really balancing studying alongside a full-time role, as well as sort of latterly family commitments. So I've been very lucky to have an incredible support network around me who've given me the time that I've needed to put the work in for the sort of the respective exams, but especially sort of 2021 to 2023 with the SQE. That was a challenging couple of years juggling everything, and there was an immense sense of relief in August of last year, having managed to refresh the SQE results page for the 1,000th time, and it finally popped up with the word passed. And I sort of had to just double check that it wasn't some sort of hallucination, that I hadn't blacked out at the desk, and it turned out that neither of those were the case. And just very, very relieved and grateful to all those who had supported me through it.
Congratulations, Matthew. That's such an amazing achievement. The SQE it's a difficult exam, and you managed to do that all whilst working. And we're going to get a little bit into your time management tips a bit later on in the episode, because I'm sure the listeners would be really keen to hear that, as well as to find out how you did pass and score so highly. We're going to get into those questions a little bit later in the interview. But I wonder if we could maybe rewind a little bit. And you mentioned imposter syndrome in one of the previous answers, and I just wondered, maybe if you could speak a little bit about imposter syndrome and mental health challenges, because I know that they're commonplace in the legal industry. And I just wondered if you had any experience with these challenges that you could maybe share with our listeners who are maybe going through something like that.
So, speaking from personal experience, I've struggled over the years, especially with imposter syndrome and anxiety. I think I'm a very driven and competitive person and really hold myself to the very highest of standards. And I think that, when things don't go quite right, which over time I've become more accepting that will happen, I've been incredibly hard on myself, and also, driven myself to think through, well, why did that go wrong? And sometimes end up going down a bit of a rabbit hole there. Also, as someone who, again, has followed sort of a non-traditional route into the profession, sometimes telling myself that actually all of my peers in this position must know all of these things, and that that if I go to someone and say, I don't really get this, that it's going to be, I'm going to have been found out that this non-lawyer has snuck in through the back door. And there definitely has been quite a bit of that. And I think that, over time, I have come to terms with that. I've certainly got better at recognizing signs within myself that I'm getting anxious, getting slightly overwhelmed, that things are getting on top of me. Usually, and I think these are fairly classic things, I'll flip between different tasks. I'll go into procrastination mode. I won't know which thing to start next. I'll, fixate around checking my list over and over again. And sometimes it's just about taking a bit of time out, having a deep breath, speaking to people around you who are in sort of your trusted circle, and, being able to be honest about how you're doing, whether that's because of things that are going on inside the work environment or outside, and actually getting that support, and just being human about it. I think there's an expectation that that sometimes we're these incredible legal robots, and the instructions come in one end and the work product comes out the other, and actually, we all have our struggles along the way, and being a bit kinder to ourselves is something that, I'm a massive advocate for. You're entitled to make mistakes. The best thing about mistakes is that they're all an opportunity to learn, and that actually the worst thing really that you can do is to get so worried about mistakes, is that when something goes wrong, that you don't speak up and say something about it. And in my entire career, when something has gone wrong, I've always been able to speak about it, and actually I've universally found that people are always super supportive and keen to help find a solution to it, whatever that solution might be. So yeah, that's my sort of take on my experience of imposter syndrome and mental health within the profession.
I'm sure a lot of people will be able to resonate with that. I certainly can. I felt like you were describing me in some of those descriptions. And, I just finished reading a book called The Authentic Lawyer by Hannah Becco. I don't know if you've read it or heard of it, but she talks a lot about imposter syndrome and like perfectionism. And there are traits that they sort of go hand in hand with the legal career sometimes. A lot of lawyers have these traits, but it's not necessarily a bad thing, but then it obviously can have a bad side to it if you let it get too far. So yeah, it's being able to recognize that, and then manage yourself, I guess, with not letting yourself get overwhelmed and going down a rabbit hole. But yeah, definitely recommend that book to any of the listeners who haven't checked it out if you're struggling with those things, and I definitely recommend it. So Matthew, you are a Grow mentor, which is great, amazing. I wondered if you have you seen any common issues, challenges that aspiring lawyers are facing when trying to break into the legal career? And if so, are there any key pieces of advice that you have for our listeners?
So I think actually the common themes that I've seen in people that I've mentored through Grow are actually things that, looking back, I see in myself, which is, I think somewhat reassuring for them, that actually, nothing they're saying is wild, wacky, or out there. It's all perfectly reasonable thoughts, like, I haven't done a law degree. how am I going to compete against all of these people that have the things around, how do I get a foot in the door? I think a very common one is, what's the best route to take? Especially at the moment, should I go LPC route that's still available to me in training contracts, or should I go SQE? And I think it's a very lawyer answer this, but I think my answer to most of those things is that actually it tends to be on a bit of a case-by-case basis. We're all different. We're all going through our own journeys, and actually the pathway that we've taken so far, and how we might learn, and the way where you want to qualify into probably influences some of those things. For myself, I know I haven't had the rotational training contract experience that many have, but actually that suited me down to the ground, because I have always thoroughly enjoyed working in disputes. And actually, when I found insolvency disputes, that was a bit of a light bulb clicked on, and I thought, there we go, I've got it. I don't need to look any further. But lots of people are unsure of what area they want to go in, and are cautious of basically not picking the wrong one. And if they go into something that they don't enjoy, will they be able to change? And again, my advice on that is that I know quite a few absolutely excellent lawyers who have started in one practice area and moved into another and are tremendously successful. So, the decisions that you make today don't dictate your entire future. Coming back to those points of being a little bit kinder to ourselves, and actually seeing it as a journey, because that's what it is, and it isn't a sprint, it is a marathon. And the bits along the way and enjoying yourself along the way where you can is really important.
That's really good advice, especially the not seeing it as a sprint and a marathon. I think that can really take the pressure off, because as a lot of us are perfectionists, we just want to get to the end result now, and it has to be the right thing. We have to have chosen the right path. But actually being kinder to yourself and just enjoying the journey and just seeing where it takes you, there is no rush. So I really like that advice. Thank you for sharing. I'd like to take a moment to speak about the University of Law, which is the university I decided to study my LPC at. The University of Law is the sponsor of this podcast and makes it possible for us to continue bringing these episodes to you. So we really appreciate you supporting us by supporting our sponsors. What really sets the University of Law apart from other universities is its belief in training students for the real world from the moment they accept a place. The University of Law's experienced career service and award-winning pro bono clinics offer students the chance to get real-life legal experience which can boost employability. They offer a range of undergraduate and postgraduate legal training and master's degrees designed by qualified experts to help students excel at any stage of their career. Their courses are employment-focused, honing key skills in a teaching environment based on real legal practice. Part-time and online study options are also available on many of their courses to help students work and study at the same time. If you'd like to find out more about the courses on offer, please click the link in the description box of the podcast. And so many of our listeners will be studying or thinking about studying the SQE. And as we've discussed, you've scored really well in the SQE. You achieved top quintile marks in FLK1 of 79% and FLK2 73%, which is really, really impressive. How did you go about revising for the SQE exams?
So I studied I used a 40-week study program with Barbary, who have, and this is my understanding, who have fairly recently entered the sort of UK legal education market, having sort of cut their teeth and worked for a long time in the US on the bar exams. So both New York and California bar, I think. And actually their sort of pitch, if you like, appealed to me. It's very evidence driven. It's very much teaching you the things that you're most likely to be examined upon, and not teaching you what I would describe as, sort of rabbit hole issues, the frills around the edges. It's really teaching you the core stuff. The way I approached SQE1, which is where those sort of 79 and 73% scores that you mentioned a moment ago come from, was to stick to the program. So that was little and often, working through the areas, regularly doing the sort of multiple choice questions that would pop up, seeing where I was. And then as I came to the end of the sort of study period, really trying to optimize those last couple of months. So I looked at broadly which areas am I performing best in, which areas am I performing least well in, and let me spend the time that I've got left trying to get my grades up, basically, in the areas that I'm not doing very well in. So those were things like tax and land. I know those were two areas that I was not doing great at early on. And my theory behind that was, if I'm getting 80% in the civil litigation in the mocks, actually, even if I perfect that through practice, I've got a maximum gain of 20%. If I'm getting 40% in tax, even if I've got much more to gain. I've got 60% of questions that I'm getting wrong. So actually, there's far more potential gain in spending my time there and trying to get a deeper understanding of that area than in the areas that I'm sort of already in my comfort zone with. I think it's really easy, and from speaking to lots of SQE students, to want to self-comfort and to want to stick in the areas that you're already doing well in, because we all like to feel like we're doing well and give ourselves a pat on the back. But actually, it's about pushing yourself out of the comfort zone. And, I don't like getting things wrong. So actually, it was really helpful to go back over those questions and think, well, why did I get this one wrong? Those are some of the things that really cemented different areas in my head, mostly out of pure stubbornness that I will not get this wrong again. So yeah, that was my approach with SQE1. SQE2 is a slightly different kettle of fish, because it's not pure legal knowledge. It's a split 50% skills and 50% legal knowledge, the legal knowledge being a subsection of the legal knowledge from SQE1. I went into that with some confidence on the legal knowledge side, because I'd performed well in SQE1, but with some trepidation on the skills side, because I've not done mock advocacy before. I've not stood before a mock judge and made submissions on various things. I've not. I've been involved in many client interviews and had experience with writing attendance notes. So those things were familiar to me. But again, you need to learn the technique that you're being examined on. So I really focused much of my efforts for SQE2 on trying as far as possible to perfect the skills elements. Because if you perfect the skills elements and you get a legal question that you feel is not the most kind on the day, actually you can still get very close to 50% of those marks before you've inputted any legal knowledge. Even if all of the legal knowledge you put in is complete and utter nonsense, you can still technically achieve 50%. And in client interview, there is no legal knowledge being examined. It's simply about building rapport with the client, active listening, making them feel understood, going through next steps, all of these, these key points, where you're then being examined in the attendance note on both skills and the law that follows on. So the other thing at SQE2 that definitely helped me was talking amongst a community of students that were studying at the same time. Actually being able to pool knowledge and pool different ways of memorizing things, mnemonics, rhymes, songs, whatever it might be, to get different things to stick in your head, different techniques, another person's view who's maybe working in one of those practice areas that you're not so comfortable with. So, I'm indebted to property lawyers out there who help me understand concepts that I'm sure were incredibly familiar and easy for them, but at the start felt like rocket science to me. And vice versa. It's reciprocity, because I could help them with some of the dispute resolution points, some of the contract points, and some of the tort points. So I felt that really, really helped. And actually, it's a good knowledge check to see whether you can explain something. Can you explain how you got to the answer to someone else, and maybe answer some follow-up questions. And I think at the point that you can do that comfortably, it's a very good indication that you've got a better and deeper understanding of the area, which is a double benefit, really. It will give you confidence going into the exam, and actually it better prepares you for a broader range of questions in the exam, because you don't just understand that this was the answer for this question, but you understand the underlying concepts, so that if a similar question arises that contains some of those concepts, you are just as equipped to answer it.
Fantastic advice. Thank you for sharing that, Matthew. I'm sure that many of our listeners who are studying the SQE will be very grateful for that. So thank you for that. And just in terms of time management, you mentioned that you were working full time and studying at the same time. So how did you actually manage to manage your time? Because it must have been really tough.
So I tried as far as possible to follow the sort of stick with the program. So the Barbary, the training provider I was with for both parts, gives you a guideline sort of amount of time that you should be spending, recommended time each day. It might be videos, it might be do this mock exercise, and it will tell you where you are sort of at varying points of time as against the program. So generally I would try and do maybe between an hour and 2 hours a day in the week. That was certainly the plan. That plan didn't always come to fruition. There were definitely times where, working in a busy practice area, it definitely intruded into study time, revision time. And it was basically about, not panicking when that happened, and just catching up as and where I could. As I mentioned earlier, I'm very lucky to have an incredibly good support network around me, including my wife, who took on very much the lion's share of parenting for about 2 years, and would do things like going out many Sundays for 4 or 5 hours with our daughter, so that I could get a good block of study and practice in, which I was really grateful for. So I think it's really about, if you're not with a training provider, it's about looking at the syllabus, breaking that down over the period that you've got between now and when you intend to take the exams, and then just checking in regularly to see how you're getting on. And I think, I've said it before, and it's a recurring theme, being kind to yourself when things happen, both in work or outside of work. If you're working while studying, just to accept that these things happen, and that work ebbs and flows, and that you can it's not inconceivable that you can catch up, and that when you've got an opportunity to do so, that you make the most of it, but not leaving yourself sort of 2 weeks out from exams and thinking, well, I should really start having a look at this SQE stuff, because it's probably cutting it a bit tight, in my opinion.
So little and often, I think, is the message there. Start early, little and often, and then obviously things are going to go wrong, but if you just stay on track, then hopefully you'll be in a good place. That's great advice. And so you mentioned that you used practice multiple choice questions from Barbary. I mean, was that all that you used, or you mentioned videos as well, but were there any additional resources that you used above and beyond the Barbary resources provided?
So I didn't purchase any other resources for the SQE. The main additional resource I used was, inside other people's heads, basically, trying to leverage their knowledge and understanding of different areas, especially at the time I was in a big sort of international full practice law firm and had some good contacts in other practice areas, who were very forgiving and accommodating of me coming and asking them, what they probably considered to be fairly dim-low questions about concepts that, they might have thought, well, this is the stuff that you learn within the first few months at law school, perhaps not realizing that I hadn't been there, hadn't done that, and didn't own the t-shirt. So yeah, there was definitely that side of things. Sometimes when there was a particular point that I like to be able to see something put into context. So if it was in a particular area of law, I'd try and go and find a judgment. Bailey is a wonderful resource for anyone out there who hasn't used it before. It's bailii.org. It's a catalogue of essentially all the judgments in a whole load of jurisdictions, but including England and Wales. You can put keywords in there, you can put particular cases in there, and it will bring up basically a whole slew of results. It's essentially Google for judgments. And I just found it really helpful to go and look at the sort of the so what questions when I was looking at a concept of, but where does this actually apply? How does this play out? Looking at, essentially the judge's reasoning when coming to decisions. And sort of also self-confessed nerd when it comes to this. I very much at home reading through judgments now, and actually what you start to do is you start to build the threads between different practice areas. I think since I started my sort of journey in law, I found more and more that actually areas connect up far more than you initially think. People think of all these different areas of law as completely distinct and operating, I think, at times in isolation from one another. And the more time you spend, the more you realize actually that they're all incredibly heavily interlinked and interwoven, and the core concepts run through.
It's really interesting. I've never heard that advice being given, but I think it's incredible. And I can imagine that reading cases to understand concepts better is probably a really good way of doing it, because it sort of puts it into a story that you can kind of remember, rather than reading the section in the textbook and you're a bit like, oh, okay. But actually seeing it in a story, a case, probably brings it to life and helps it be a lot more memorable. So thank you for sharing that tip. I think that's fantastic advice. And did you actually find that the SQE questions that you had, the mock ones, were they a true representation of the actual exam questions? Because I've heard like varying opinions on this. So I just wondered what your experience was.
So I had a feeling this question was going to come up. And I'm somewhat restrained in the answer that I can give because of the rules around SQE and the content of exams. But
right.
But what I can say is that the practice questions that I did with Barbary, I was sort of in the run up to the exams scoring in a similar region to how I then scored in the exams. I wouldn't say that the questions were necessarily a true representation, sort of if you'd have slotted an actual SQE question into the Barbary ones, would you spot that there was a difference? I'd say yes, but they equipped me well enough for sure. I've heard varying things around varying providers. I think the only other prevailing thing I've heard is that QLTS's material is perhaps slightly harder than the real thing, but that's really I can't speak to that personally because I've not done the QLTF mock questions or the course. Equally, there are, I think now, 360 example questions that the SRA have published. And I've heard lots of people say that those questions are not necessarily representative of the ones that you get in the exam. And having looked at some of them, I think that that's probably a fair commentary. I think they probably are on the slightly easier than what you'll get in the exam side of things, which, strikes me as a little bit mean, but what do I know? I'm not running this thing, probably fortunately.
Right. Okay. That's really handy to know. Yeah, I was dying to ask you that. So thanks for sharing. And then, yeah, I mean, so I came across your profile on LinkedIn. I think that you have, great presence on there. You post really interesting, thought-provoking and helpful posts. So I just wondered if you had any tips for our listeners for building a strong personal brand, both on LinkedIn or elsewhere online and in person as well, because I think, personal brand is both online and offline.
I think broadly it's about having a take on various issues and an opinion on them and being sort of authentic. I think there's lots of content out there that is broadly similar. So if you look around the time that any new key judgments come out, you'll see almost across the board articles from all of the major law firms that are essentially key summary of this case, which obviously has its place. I find those sorts of things really helpful if I've not got time to digest the full judgment at that time and pick out the key issues. But actually, there's a big difference between a firm's profile and your profile as an individual, being able to speak to the sorts of things that you've got going on, obviously within the bounds of confidentiality and all of those rules, the things that are interesting you, trends that you might be seeing or interacting on other people's posts as well, and actually building sort of a bit of rapport and connections. There are numerous people that I've connected with first and interacted with first on LinkedIn who then I've met in person, and it's basically the ice is already broken, and it then makes sort of those more meaningful chats about what they've got going on, what's keeping them busy, how do they see the market, those sorts of things. And also the human questions like, what have you got going on outside of work? Tell me a bit more about you, without it getting into sort of speed dating territory, are all, those are all good things. And obviously these sorts of things come with time as well. I have been on LinkedIn sort of for probably approaching 10 years now, because it was part and parcel and quite a heavy part of my life when I worked in recruitment. And you get a feel for what is and isn't, going to be engaging content. You don't want to necessarily be known as you don't want to get a shock jock reputation. You don't want to be posting outrageous content. You don't want to be, basically calling people out on LinkedIn either. It's not really about that. It's it is about basically networking and trying to connect people together. And actually, it's another really key point of being a good lawyer is that ability to know if you're not the absolute right person for a job, knowing the right person for it, and having a profile on LinkedIn will help you both internally within big firms and externally with that. So yeah, I really I rate it pretty highly. I think it's quite a vibrant and mixed community of people that are speaking on LinkedIn. There's some really great voices around key issues in the sector as well, like mental health, like diversity and inclusion, like promoting the new route into the profession, both sort of SILEX and the SQE as well. Yeah, I think it's broadly a very good thing. I think just a word of caution of don't potentially get caught up in a political storm that's going to end up getting you pulled over the coals with HR or worse. And remember that it isn't Facebook and it isn't Instagram and it isn't Snapchat. It's not, it is a professional platform, and so you do just need to be a little bit mindful of that even you can caveat as much as you want, all opinions on my own, that sometimes someone might associate what you're saying with your firm, and that your firm might not like that if it's if it's too out there. So to get the hang of that, if you're unsure, especially early on, run it past someone. It will, in my experience, be looked at as a really good thing, because it broadly falls into the BD category, which most lawyers have no sort of expectation to be doing that until later on in their career. But lots of the ones who do it early and really start to get those skills and master those skills early will find the latter part of their career trajectory is much steeper and much easier to progress through, because they'll already have a significant network of people built up, and will be able to make those connections more quickly.
Really good tips. And so where can our listeners connect with you?
Oh, I think it's the perfect segue, isn't it? So
might be LinkedIn, I'm not sure.
LinkedIn for sure. Find me, Matthew Letts, on LinkedIn. You can use the little 3 dots and click connect or follow, whichever you'd prefer. Also in-person events, so regularly at sort of insolvency, commercial disputes, contentious trusts type events throughout the year. And then, those mythical things of like in person. So, working in central London quite a bit of the time. I'm happy to, and have caught up with numerous people over a coffee just to chat through things, especially, students who are thinking about which way to go, obviously with the caveat of subject to diary. So yeah, those are the key places. If anyone has any specific insolvency restructuring type questions, all of my details are also on the Isadore Goldman website, so people can also find me there.
Lovely. Well, I will leave links to your LinkedIn and to the Isadore Goldman page on in the description box of the podcast, so listeners can easily find you. So yeah, thank you so much, Matthew, for being a guest on the show. It's been great to have you on, and it's been so nice to hear about your career journey and all of your tips for the SQE. I'm sure the listeners will agree that it's been really helpful. So yeah, thank you again, and thank you to all of the listeners for tuning in as well. And we'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.
To hear more of the Student Lawyers podcast, hit the subscribe button and leave us a star rating and review. If you would like to join the Student Lawyer as a writer, please email hello@thestudentlawyer.com.